So today we're going to talk about the Northwest Passage and the future of the Arctic Ocean as it relates to Canada and the United States. The presentation is going to focus on three distinct but interconnected areas covered in my research paper, focused on international trade, pact defense, and scientific research. So first of all, what is the Northwest Passage? Well, the Northwest Passage is the roughly 900-mile sea route that spans the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Most of the route follows a path that closely shadows the Canadian mainland in the northern Canadian archipelago. Most interest in the Northwest Passage relates to trade and defense. For vessels looking to transit from Asia to the eastern United States and North America in general, the route shaves almost 7,000 kilometers off of a voyage when compared with transit through the Panama Canal. Could also present a route for vessels unable to transit the Panama Canal due to political reasons, engineering constraints, or other complications. Due to heavy ice risks, the Northwest Passage is currently only transitable by cargo vessels utilizing an icebreaker escort. The cargo vessel follows the icebreaker closely, and the icebreaker leads the way, clearing a safe path free of both pack ice and sea ice. It's a slow, complex, and risky process. As such, the current utilization of the Northwest Passage can be described as very minor when compared to the Panama Canal. The predominant emerging question about the Northwest Passage relates closely to climate change. As the Arctic ice sheet reduces in size year after year, there's a significant interest in the Asian market about the viability of a Northwest Passage transit without the need for icebreaker escorts. Several ships have at least partially transited the Northwest Passage during the summer months without an escort. However, the Canadian authorities report that it is not continuously or reliably transitable without support. The matter of whether the Northwest Passage is considered to be Canadian waters depends on who you ask. The waters are classified as internal waters by the Canadian Defence Force, citing the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The complication with this definition is that Canada has drawn the baselines, or the geographical line from the mainland, used to determine limits of sovereign waters, not from the mainland, but from many of the large Arctic islands, such as Victoria Island. Several nations dispute this claim by Canada to the Northwest Passage. Interestingly, the most fervent protests have been made by the United States. There's a long history of frustration and friction between the two nations as it relates to Canada's maritime sovereignty. The dispute arose in the late 60s with the increase in U.S. shipping traffic to the Prudhoe Bay oil field. The rift was further opened in 1985 when the U.S. Coast Guard icebreaker Polar Sea passed through the Northwest Passage without asking for permission from Canada. This led to political outcry among Canadian citizens and a new declaration from Canada insisting upon their control of the Northwest Passage. Interestingly, Russia and Canada offer each other mutual support in their claims to sovereignty over their respective northern passages. Canada and its control over the Northwest Passage, and Russia and its control over its northern sea route. Russia is currently undergoing a large program to expand and further refine navigation along the northern sea route with the aid of China. While not the topic of this research paper strictly, Russia's expansion and focus on the northern shipping and economic military use of the Arctic Ocean should be noted as a possible area of concern when it comes to Canadian and U.S. military policy. This leads into the third point here, international cooperation. If Canada and the U.S. are to have a mutually beneficial and strong defense pact, such as the one that exists currently for land defense, there'll need to be further treaties and agreements on the usage of the Northwest Passage beyond what currently exists as defined in the '88 Arctic Agreement. Tensions were briefly eased after the 9/11 attacks when the United States abandoned the notion of international transit in the Northwest Passage in favor of an increased and strengthened Arctic security zone based around Canadian sovereignty and defense, but this has largely fallen out of favor with the Trump administration firmly insisting on the international status of the Northwest Passage. Current system is based around a set of laws and negotiations called the 1988 Arctic Cooperation Agreement. Designed to set a precedent for commonly encountered issues of sovereignty in transit, the agreement allows for the free transit of all ships flagged under the United States that are, quote, not engaged in research. While this appears to give the U.S. great leeway in access to the Northwest Passage, in order to appease Canada, the articles also make the distinction that all United States Navy and Coast Guard vessels shall be considered to be conducting research at all times. Thusly, all U.S. military vessels must request permission from Canada before transiting the strait. As mentioned earlier, the Northwest Passage has historically been exceedingly treacherous to navigate due to large amounts of sea ice in the shipping lanes. With the acceleration of global warming and the average increase in temperatures per year, researchers estimate that the Northwest Passage will become ice-free in the summer months by the end of the 21st century. The prolongation of the season with the free passage along the Northwest Passage may be increased from 2 to 4 months. Based on other models, some research says that the Northwest Passage will become substantially more accessible as early as mid-2040. With global warming showing no signs of stopping and, on the contrary, accelerating in its impact, the issue of the Northwest Passage navigation and its increased efficiency at international interest has never been a more pressing topic. As defined in 1988, research ships and all U.S. Navy and Coast Guard vessels must request permission from the Canadian government before transiting the passage. While it might seem presumptive to classify all military ships as conducting research, it's actually grounded in reality. Coast Guard icebreakers currently almost always carry a full complement of research personnel on board. During transits to both the Arctic and Antarctic, experiments are carried out, and both are equipped with fully functioning mobile laboratories. The U.S. Navy, on the other hand, carries out Arctic research less frequently, and the classification of naval vessels as research vessels in the 1988 agreement likely stems less from realistic definition and more from Canada's desire to impose an exclusivity clause into the agreement as it relates to warships in the Northwest Passage. By defining all U.S. Navy vessels as research vessels, Canada has effectively barred U.S. military operations in the North Sea without advance permission. There have been brief periods of tension when the U.S. Navy has ordered nuclear submarines to transit undetected to the Northwest Passage, their highly secretive operations going unannounced to the Canadian government. The tension in the Northwest Passage represents a tension uncommon in most Canadian U.S. sectors, which is why it presents such an interesting topic for a research paper. The future of the Arctic is of increasing relevance as the days and years tick by. Global warming is opening new areas of research, oil mining, and military operation that for centuries have been inaccessible due to harsh conditions and dangerous ice. As conditions continue to change and northern nations seek out these new economic opportunities and resources, Canada will no doubt be thrust into the center of the world stage, right along with Russia, the United States, and other northern European nations. There's possibly no greater economic impact felt in the North Sea than the changing climate, and with the Northwest Passage becoming transitable within the summer months in as little as 15 years, the U.S. is scrambling to ensure northern border security. Russian operations in the North and Arctic seas have been increasing over the past several years, and the U.S. is not the only country to dispute another nation's sovereign claims in the area. Interestingly enough, Moscow also disputes Sweden's claim to the Arctic archipelago of Svalbard and transit to its north and south, based upon Russia's interpretation of a 1920 treaty with Sweden. Russian naval and army buildup in the Barents Sea presents another area of concern for U.S. military officials. Russia has demonstrated most recently in eastern Ukraine that they have absolutely zero issue with international aggression and annexation. We're currently seeing the most extreme example of Russian expansion since the Cold War, and if the United States and Canada are to have secure Northwest borders, they'll need to overcome past difficulties related to sovereignty. As has been demonstrated in this class time after time, the US and Canada have had a long and closely knit relationship of mutual support and cooperation for the economic benefit. This will now be truly put to the test, as the 1988 Arctic Agreement will certainly be rising to the forefront for renegotiation. The United States has already taken steps to increase the strength on the northern border, both on land and at sea, and Canadian cooperation will surely be necessary at a point in the close future. Just last year, the U.S. Army reactivated the historic 11th Airborne Division for the first time since World War II. This division, specializing in Arctic warfare, will be located in Alaska and will serve as the first line of defense against Russian land-based aggression and as a resource for all tactical knowledge related to cold weather military operations. Finally, near and dear to my heart is the United States Coast Guard, of which I am currently a serving member. Congress recently authorized the reassessment and recapitalization of the U.S. Coast Guard's icebreaker fleet. All icebreakers currently operated by the United States are commanded by the United States Coast Guard, and in recent years, the aging fleet has had numerous logistical and reliability issues. Currently, only 2 icebreakers flagged under the United States operate in the Arctic Ocean, the Healy and the Polar Star. Russia, on the other hand, operates over 50. While the U.S. vessels are significantly larger and more advanced than the majority of the Russian fleet, it cannot be ignored that the United States military has systematically passed over the Arctic in terms of strategic importance in favor of the desert warfare we have been so actively involved in over the past 2 decades. With the revitalization and expansion of the 11th Airborne and the hundreds of millions of dollars of investment that Alaska is currently seeing, along with the revitalization and expansion of the U.S. Coast Guard fleet, it's clear that the Pentagon is reassessing the Arctic's importance and shifting strategic resources to the northern region. The defense of the lands in the far north is of vital economic importance to both nations, and it really is something that can only be done with full US-Canadian cooperation. As we've seen in this class time after time again, the two nations have a history of collaboration against all odds, and it is my hope that we will continue to see that in the Arctic theater.